Hello, it's Tim Grant.
And Nicci McLeod from the Righting Wrongs podcast.
This episode contains descriptions of fraud and exploitation.
We'll explore themes related to the actions of a fraudster who targeted their victim by fabricating a romantic interest in them and a relationship with them in order to con them out great sums of money. This is clearly not simply a financial crime, but one that can have dire consequences for victims' mental health. Some listeners may find the content distressing.
Our discussion will, as always, include an in-depth analysis of how forensic linguistics played a role in unravelling the fraudster's techniques.
We hope you enjoy the show.
Righting Wrongs, an original podcast series from the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics, Series 1, Episode 4, Romance Fraud, the Linguistic Crime Scene, with Dr Elisabeth Carter.
Hello, and welcome to Righting Wrongs, the podcast from AIFL, the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. We're all about improving the delivery of justice through the analysis of language. I'm Professor Tim Grant.
And I'm Dr Nicci McLeod, Deputy Director of AIFL.
So Nicci, today we're going to be talking about romance fraud. How does this fit in with our overall theme of forensic linguistics?
So we're focusing today on just one specific case of what we term romance fraud, when people are duped into sending money to criminals who have basically convinced them that they are in a genuine romantic relationship. So the fraudsters use language to manipulate the victim, to persuade them, to exploit them. This is a serious business. In the last financial year, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau received 8,036 reports of romance fraud, amounting to over 92 million lost. And the average loss per victim is 11,500. So we're clearly dealing here with serious losses. The reason we want to talk about it here is because obviously at its heart, this is a crime that occurs via the means of language. Generally, I guess these connections were made online and they will start with a kind of chat conversation, and it's through language that this process of manipulation and persuasion and exploitation actually happens. So linguistic analysis can shed light on the fraudster's tactics and can ultimately protect people from being exploited. So it's fitting into our aim of improving the delivery of justice. Today, we are lucky enough to have a romance fraud expert and friend of the Institute, Dr Elisabeth Carter, on the podcast.
Liz is a forensic linguist and criminologist who's authored many academic papers, including the 2024 book, The Language of Romance Crimes. She also has numerous appearances on radio and TV, including on Thinking Aloud, on BBC's Word of Mouth with Michael Rosen, programmes such as Rip Off Britain or For Love or Money and Dirty Rotten Scammers. She has numerous awards from the Tackling Economic Crime Awards, including Outstanding Female Economic Crime Professional. Liz is a prime example of what we in forensic linguistics strive for, which is stepping outside of academia to engage with law enforcement, with public protection and with changing policy. And for Liz, that's across the fraud fighting sector. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
So, Liz, before we get into the specifics of this case, can we just hear a little bit about romance fraud in general? This is obviously an area that you've done a lot of work in. What is romance fraud?
Well, romance fraud is a crime where the fraudsters try and get money from the victims through the means of a romance. So they'll talk to somebody online, develop the victim's feelings to a point where they believe that they're in a genuine romantic relationship. Then that the victim is then exploited for their money, and the fraudster uses that relationship as the mechanism through which they take their money.
Okay, and is this a widespread problem? Does this happen a lot?
It is. There were more than 40,000 cases reported to Action Fraud since 2020, and it's currently one of the top 5 most commonly reported frauds. In 2024, there were over 9,000 reports and losses of £99.4 million. So it's a massive industry for these criminals. In terms of gender, it's pretty equal between male and female victims, and every age group is represented. So there's not one age group that's particularly represented in the statistics. I'll speak about difficulties with statistics in a moment. But for men, it's usually around the 20 to 29 age group. And for women, for the 50 to 59 age group, so slightly higher. But there's even been reports from under 9-year-olds and over 100 years old. London's a leading source of reports. Now, I've mentioned a lot of stats here. The issue with this is that the stats are only from people who have reported this crime, and they're entirely skewed in that fashion. Only 13% of fraud is reported at the moment, and that's from the Crime Survey of England and Wales. And of course, the stats are skewed for who's most likely to report being a victim of this crime.
So who are the more likely to report, and what might be the barriers to people reporting?
This is all to do with shame. There's a lot of research about this, and it's the shame of being a victim of this kind of crime. And part of this is because of the negative narratives around being a victim of fraud in general and romance fraud in particular. Why didn't you spot it? The narratives, the words you'll hear are greedy, stupid, gullible. Whereas in reality, which we'll talk about a bit later, I think, it's actually a type of abuse. It's a type of grooming.
You've mentioned grooming there. Obviously, at the Institute, we've got lots of work going on around the role of language in processes like grooming. And obviously, this is no exception. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about the role of language. I mean, obviously, there's the processes of persuasion and the process of getting money out of someone. What does language have to do with that?
It is all the way through this crime. So it's committed through the use of language. It's the mechanism through which these criminals manage to get money from the victims. I first came into studying fraud and analysing the language in fraud because I found that most research in it looked at what is it around the victim? Why are they so susceptible? Why do they keep giving money to these criminals? But nobody was looking at how are these criminals using language to manipulate and persuade without causing alarm. It's not as if victims are continuously just, throwing their money at criminals when it's obvious it's a fraud. They're being manipulated. Those alarm bells that everyone else sees outside of the interaction, they can't see, obviously, which is why it's one of the most common crimes that we have in the UK. So the role of language is quite clear here. Interestingly, with romance fraud, it's a specific type of APP fraud, which is called advanced push payment fraud, which is where the victim themselves is used as the tool through which they are then deceived.
So just before we go on, can you explain advanced push payment fraud a little more?
This is where a victim has been used as the tool through which they are deceived. So you can imagine the shame around this. I'll unpick this a little bit more here as well. So the fraudster gets the victim to send money. The victim will contact the bank online or over the phone or in person and say, I would like to transfer my money to this person. It's not, therefore, a fraudster hacking into their account or taking money away from them without their knowledge. The victim is used as the tool themselves.
And is that what the push payment bit means?
Yes, absolutely. So they are instructing the bank to then have that payment sent out, pushed to another account, and it's on their say-so, which means, it's difficult for banks because they have the real and genuine customer there saying, yes, this is my money. Yes, this is genuine. No, it's not a fraud. Let's go ahead with it.
So they're willingly, unbeknownst to them being defrauded, but willingly handing over their money.
And this is where the rub is really, because it does appear completely willingly. And the victim will say, yes, I absolutely want to do this. And they become really angry and frustrated with the bank if the fraud processes kick in, as they should do. And that's also where the shame comes from afterwards. It's like, yes, I wanted to send this money. I was actually... Without me, the fraud wouldn't happen. So you can see, how powerful that language is from the fraudster, which is, where the interest is.
Yeah. So you talked a bit there about the shame that victims often feel. And I guess that is one of the sort of the biggest challenges around, reporting rates and so on. Where does this shame kind of stem from? What is there out there that sort of prevents people from taking the action that perhaps they should?
This type of crime is not only financially devastating, but also psychologically incredibly harmful too. One of the most psychologically harmful frauds. This manifests in multiple ways, one of which is these negative societal narratives around victims of fraud. How could you have not seen it? Why didn't you protect yourself? The reasons behind that are the reporting of fraud by media outlets and our own narratives around it. Quite often the reporting only shows when somebody has sent money because, of course, column inches, you can't show the entire grooming process. But what could happen is that, newspapers and so on could show that it is a grooming process. So what you get is society saying, why didn't you protect yourself? Another issue is the protection messaging that we get from organisations such as banks and the police, which I actively am involved in trying to change. Now, what they do in many cases, and, listeners can look out for this themselves, is that there'll be messages such as, if you feel really uneasy or if you're in a fraud, you must stop and challenge it. You must protect yourself. The whole idea around fraud, though, the whole MO, the whole modus operandi, how these criminals perform these frauds, is that they don't get those alarm bells going. They don't get those red flags waving. So when you become a victim of this type of fraud or any type of fraud, you then beat yourself up about it. I didn't spot it. I should have been able to. The messaging tells me it's easy to spot and stop.
So moving on to this week's case specifically, we'll open the case file in just a minute, but can you explain what your role was? Because in other episodes of Righting Wrongs, we've had linguists who've been investigative analysts on a case or been involved in a prosecution and so on and so forth. So what was your role in this case?
My role in this case is a little bit different. I came in after the case had been finished and after it had been discussed and everything had been finalised. But for me, I came in because the victim of the case asked me to look at it, to ask, how did it happen? How did this happen to me? Is there a way I could have spotted it? And if so, could you please try and make some techniques to try and help other people who are in that situation? Now, this is quite common with victims of this crime that I come in contact with. What they want is for their awful situation to be used for something good in the future. And that gives them some level of justice with a small j, when quite often you don't get justice in the traditional sense of someone going to prison.
Okay, so that's an interesting and sort of new use of forensic linguistics for us on this podcast. We've not had this sort of post hoc analysis to give satisfaction to the victim, so that's really interesting.
With a sort of preventative motivation. Yeah, it's quite different.
So let's open the case file.
It's June 2018. 45-year-old Roger Blunt, not his real name, is recently divorced and has full custody of his 10-year-old daughter, Poppy. He lives in Wales and works as a car auctioneer. He decides it's time to get back into the dating game and signs up to an online dating platform. Within a few days, he is matched with Camilla. She says she's in her 30s and was born in Scotland but grew up in New York and is now serving in the army in Afghanistan. She says she's been in the forces for 16 years and is widowed. Her husband had also been a soldier and was killed in the line of duty. Camilla also reports having a young child of a similar age to Poppy back in the UK. Roger and Camilla soon begin exchanging messages on a daily basis, and Roger develops very strong feelings for his new online girlfriend. Camilla says she'll soon be returning to the UK on leave and is looking forward to meeting up with Roger in the flesh. But there's a problem. Camilla's bank account has been frozen, and her bank says that due to security issues, they're refusing to fix the issue until she reports to her branch in person. Camilla tells Roger she's desperate. She needs money for her child's school fees, for food, to repay loans, flights home, and medication. Believing them to be a couple in a stable relationship, Roger began sending her money. Small amounts at first. Safe, he thought, in the knowledge that she would repay him when she regained access to her bank account. Despite warnings from his own bank that this could be a scam, he continued transferring money to her. He was in fact being defrauded. Overall, the person calling themselves Camilla defrauded Roger of £24,600 of his own money, and he was also manipulated into laundering money for the fraudster to the value of £135,386. Camilla had convinced Roger to collect money from MoneyGram stores and to buy mobile phones and send them to Kenya. It transpired these were then used by fraudsters in Kenya to defraud victims in the UK. The perpetrator was never found, and the victim shouldered the financial loss. He wasn't prosecuted for his involvement in the money laundering ring. Today's guest, Dr Elisabeth Carter, a forensic linguist and criminologist from Kingston University, is an expert in the language of romance fraud, and she was approached by Roger and asked to analyse the interactions so they can be used to help protect others in the future from this kind of crime, and also make the criminal justice system and financial industry more aware of the reality of romance fraud.
So, Liz, we've heard a bit there about this specific case. We're going to be listening in a minute to some extracts from the conversations that were ongoing between Roger and Camilla. But before we get onto that, I just sort of wanted to ask kind of how do you approach a task like this? So you've been asked to kind of look at the techniques that the fraudster's using. Where do you start with a job like that?
It's an incredibly big job. Now, romance frauds, by their very nature, go on for months and sometimes years. So there are hundreds or thousands in this case of pages of data. And data for me is the back and forth, those interactions between the victim and the perpetrator. So I begin by reading the whole lot from start to finish to get a feel for it. But as I go through, my brain is ticking, and I just make notes every time. I'm like, wow, okay, that's the first ask for money. Okay, so I make sure I get all of those asks for money, and I make sure I highlight them in particular colour. I love my different colours. Then I start moving to, okay, are there any language patterns that I can see as I'm just looking through? Just a first look through, and there's no pressure to find anything. So this is a really inductive way of looking at the data from the bottom up. I don't have any preconceived notions. I just want to see what is in that data. I start to see patterns. For example, the use of emojis, they come and go. And I found that, for example, there'd be more emojis when the perpetrator was trying to get the victim to do something. A bit like love bombing that we see in, domestic abuse and coercive control, increasing that feeling of engagement and love. And she also withdrew communications at some points when the victim wasn't doing what the perpetrator wanted. So that's how I approach it, really. And every single romance fraud I look at is, of course, different, but you do still get those touch points, the ask for money, the amount of communication, and the words they use as well.
I think in this case it is nearly all textual data that you're looking at. So these are messaging apps, WhatsApp or some other messenger with the emojis and so on. Do you ever also get voice notes or voice messaging in these kind of cases?
Yes, I do. And when the victims are happy to send those over, which is in most cases, but not all, I do listen to those as well. And I try transcribe them using conversation analytic methodologies. So the in-breaths, the out-breaths, the pauses, the tone of the voice, sometimes it's a smiley voice, you can hear that smile coming through. And that makes a great big difference. When we're looking at just textual data, I noticed that there's a lot more extra linguistic stuff going on. So you will have a lot of ellipses, so the dots, you'll have GIFs, and you'll also have the emojis as well to try and make up for the lack of that, other interaction you get in speech.
The data or the extracts of chat that we're going to be listening to in this episode are all textual. So these have been read out. They were sent initially through the medium of, like Tim says, some kind of messaging app, WhatsApp or something similar. But we are going to have them voiced. And so I'm going to play our first clip. But before we do, can you give us a bit of background? So you provided me with some of this chat log, but this is page 13 is where it started. So obviously there's quite some material that's gone before this. So perhaps you can explain where we are at this point, what's happened prior to this.
Now, this is the first interaction I sent you because this is the first ask for money. This is the first point. And it's quite telling that it's 13 pages in. So there's a lot of talk before the ask for money happens. And this is something that, public messaging gets wrong all the time. It says, if you're asked for money out of the blue, it's going to be a fraud. Well, yes, it is going to be a fraud, but it's not going to be a romance fraud. When it's a romance fraud, there's 13 pages here, and that's completely normal. There's a lot of rapport building and all of the absolutely bog standard normal things that you'd expect in a relationship that develops between what starts as strangers and then starts to become romantic. The two players here, they talk about the jobs that they hold, where they grew up, their children, what's happened in the past, all of those things to bond, and they have a nice time doing so. It's utterly indistinguishable from a normal relationship that's developing. What we have found out is that the perpetrator and the victim have very similar backgrounds in terms of they are the sole caretaker of a dependent, of a child. Now, criminals will often do this, mirroring, it's called. They will mirror their experiences with the person they're trying to defraud because it makes them seem more like them. We trust ourselves. We trust people like us. They don't seem other. What we find is different, though, is she's out in Afghanistan. She has quite a dangerous job. She's patrolling. We already have the victim a little bit worried about her and checking on her so she got home safe every day. She's also widowed in the line of duty. Now, with female, or they say they're female, romance fraudsters, quite often they were married before, but they're not anymore. And the reason for that is not because they are a horrible person to be married to, but often because they're widowed. So there's no judgment there.
Right. So that's quite a recurrent theme.
Yes, very common.
Okay, so we're going to move on to hearing this first extract. So like you say, this is the first request for money. It's 13 pages in. They've spent some time with just sort of everyday exchange of conversation, as you'd expect with a newly emerging relationship.
I need to pay for an app on my phone. Do you think you could help me get some gift card? My bank card won't work for some reason. I do not know. Kiss, kiss.
Just got out now. I can help a little, I'm sure. As long as it doesn't break my bank. Laughing emoji. What app you paying for? You gaming? Laughing emoji. Kiss, kiss, kiss.
That's what I need it for. A single £50 should do. I'll refund you if you need me to.
Just talk us through that first clip then. Unpack for us what's happening.
Here, as in many romance frauds, the criminal here is trying to get money from the victim, but without directly saying, I want money. Instead, she's asking for money for something. Well, she's saying she needs to pay for an app on her phone. She opens it by saying exactly that. I need to pay for an app on my phone. This is the statement here. She's not saying I need you to pay for an app on the phone. So any alarm bells here, not that there would be because they are now officially in a romantic relationship that's been going on for quite a long time. But she then asks the question, do you think you can help me get some gift cards? My bank card won't work. This is now othering. This is using some other quite ordinary situation that might happen day to day. You know, your bank card has stopped working. Your bank isn't doing the thing it should do. This is a temporary issue. Asking for money for an app is not very risky. It's a small amount of money and the person's going to get it back quite quickly because it's a temporary problem. He said it can help a little bit. He asks, are you gaming? Interestingly, the perpetrator doesn't say what she needs it for. She just agrees with what the victim is saying. You're gaming, that's what I need it for. So what we find with people who lie is that they try to not say anything new, anything incriminating. They tend to just agree with what the person has said before because it keeps them very safe. She says a single £50 should do. Now the language here, a single 50. Single means this is something quite small. £50 is not quite small, but single.
Just £50.
Just. I love that you said just, because just is one of these fraudsters' tactics. Just is just very small. Reduce it, minimises it. I'll refund you if you need me to. Now, the use of refund, I think, is very interesting as well, because refund's very transactional. It's not something that you would ordinarily say. You'd say, I'll pay you back, I'll refund you. And this is one thing that is very unusual that you wouldn't often hear fraudsters saying, because this is not something that's quite ordinary. I'll refund you if you need me to. So there's no expectation that she would automatically give the money back. This is a bit of a tester here. She wants to know whether he's going to give that money and not require it back. So she's training him for the next time and the next time. Now, after time 1, time 2, time 3, it's very difficult psychologically as the victim to then row back and go, I don't want to give you any money, because they've already given money under these situations. And now they would seem churlish or not investing in the relationship, properly.
Let's move on to the next clip, which comes a few days later, where we get a first thing in the morning clip.
Florida, babe. Kiss, kiss.
Morning, babes. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Impressed? Speaking taffy? Kiss. How are you? Back in work at my desk. Crying emoji, crying emoji, crying emoji. You okay? Kiss, kiss, kiss.
How are you feeling with work, babe? Kiss, kiss, kiss. Well, I feel down, to be honest. I hope to pick up at some point. Kiss, kiss.
It's okay. Falling back into routine as normal. Kiss, kiss, kiss. What's wrong? Sad emoji, kiss, kiss.
Oh, okay then. So you had your coffee blast? Well, what's wrong is a bit embarrassing. I'll tell you later on. Kiss, kiss, kiss.
So in that clip, we can hear that a bit more of a relationship has been established. They're obviously kind of messaging first thing in the morning and saying their good mornings and so on. Camilla's kind of moved on to something else here, hasn't she? What's she up to in this message?
Now, here, this is the first time that Camilla has started to show that there's something wrong. In most romance frauds, what you'll get is the fraudster introducing some level of their own vulnerability And this is precisely to try and draw a protective response from the victim, to try and get them to come in and to protect them. And quite often it's framed or phrased as a reluctant vulnerability. And we can see what she's doing in this one here. So Roger quite early on is saying morning. After each of these kisses, there's a pause of a couple of minutes, sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes a minute or two. She's not responding. So this is why he says, "You're okay," because usually she responds quite quickly. She's been responding quite quickly to get the victim, to get Roger into this situation where he's expecting a response. It's kind of programmed into it, getting used to it.
Training him up to expect it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is the grooming I was speaking about earlier. He's groomed into thinking this is the normal rhythm of things. And of course, in the first flush of love as well, in a relationship, you know and you get a feel for the normal patterns of communication. So he started to get pauses from her. And obviously she's read the messages because he can see the ticks that are blue. So he says, "You're okay." She doesn't answer his question straight away. And this is another tactic. She's answering something else. She's addressing, how are you feeling? But he's asked her, how are you feeling? So she should respond to that first.
Yeah.
She's keeping him hanging. And then she frames this as something she's reluctant to tell him about by using the word well, which is a dispreferred marker.
I think, can we just explain perhaps what we mean
Yes.
by dispreferred and what
Of
preference
course.
structures? In a
Preference.
nutshell, tell us about preference
In
structures.
a nutshell, a preference structure and preference organisation is all about our conversation and communication and what's deemed normal, what's deemed not. Now, if I were to ask you a question, do you want to have a coffee after this? I would expect you to say, yes, that's fine, I've got time for this. If you didn't have time, you had to rush off immediately, you'd probably say something like, well, actually, I've got to be going. And the word well and actually prepare me as the recipient that something dispreferred is going to happen. The preference for when you ask someone a question that you think is going to say yes, if you're going to say no to that question, you would then have something at the beginning. You'd preface it with well or actually. And she's doing that here. Well, I feel down, to be honest. Now, when someone says to be honest, it's something that you don't really want to say. But to be honest, I feel down.
So you're very kind of reluctantly
Very reluctant.
giving this information.
Yes. But really, she's not reluctantly giving this information at all. She's just structuring her response to look as though it's reluctant. And it's to invite him, Roger, to come in and ask more and to be concerned. She wants his concern. If someone's concerned, they're going to try and do something for you to help you. This again goes back to the protect messaging that we quite often get for the general public. What we don't see is that victims of romance fraud quite often feel powerful and empowered, and they feel like they can help somebody rather than overpowered with demands for money. So he's then saying, what's wrong? He's got a sad face. And then she doesn't reply, again saying what's wrong, again holding him on the line, like withholding that information. And then she says, well, what's wrong is a bit embarrassing. I'll tell you later on. This is absolutely classic. He's now really concerned about her. He's going to be thinking about her for the rest of the day. So by the time she does get back to him, he's going to be really eager to help. But making someone feel concerned is also something that happens in coercive control. So these are where the links are between romance fraud and coercive control. This manipulation of the victim's emotions and the responsibility that victims feel for the perpetrator.
And just to sort of step back a little bit to what you were saying before about not answering the question, I think we need to maybe go into technicalities again and say, from a conversation analysis perspective, we are looking at broken adjacency pairs.
We are.
What do I mean by that?
Yes. Yes, well, the rules of conversation are that when a question is asked, the adjacency pair is going to be the answer to that question.
So the very next turn.
In the very next turn. And if it's not answered in the very next turn, this is unusual.
Yes, it's heard as being absent, isn't it? It's kind of,
Yes.
it's going to be a cause for concern, a troubleshoot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, this person's a criminal. What you'd think is, oh, there's something terribly wrong and they're trying to avoid answering the question. I must help them.
So later that same evening, so the interaction we've just seen was earlier on in the day, and we get to the evening and we get this extract.
Anyway, how are you feeling now? You said you were down earlier today. Perked up now? 20 minutes and about 10 unrelated turns later.
I was hoping for some good news from the bank as regards my blocked bank account, and they just said it's gonna have to wait until I get back home for some verification in person. Kiss, kiss, kiss. That's a bummer, isn't it? Kiss, kiss. And I've got the monthly shopping that I have to sort coming up. Kiss, kiss.
So we get a bit of delay through the day that you've talked about in answering the question here. And then this is the response after that. Roger's hoping for some better news, and after a bit more prevarication, is that what's going on? We get this response from Camilla. So what's going on with this?
So this 20 minutes and about 10 unrelated turns that happen in between him saying, perked up now, how are you? You said you were down earlier. In those turns, she is also withholding the information that he's been waiting for all day, which again is increasing that anxiety in the victim. Then she does come back to it. What she does here is she doesn't ask for money. You'd think that she might do. Something bad has happened, I need some money. But what she's said is a statement about something that she's doing to try and sort out a problem that's happened. Importantly, she is taking this into her own hands. She's not asking him for any help at all. She's just saying what's happened. She can't get her bank account unblocked. Remember earlier we were saying that she asked for a gift card to pay for some gaming because she couldn't do it herself because her bank card was blocked. It's going to have to wait till later, and she's got the monthly shopping that she has to sort coming up. She's setting up here a situation where she needs money for the most basic of necessities, which is to eat. She's not asking him for money, but she's inviting, indirectly, a response, an offer of money from him. And this is where some of the shame comes in. You know, if he steps in at this moment and says, I'm going to give you some money, don't worry, I'm going to help you. Later on, when he realises that this is a criminal here doing this precisely for that outcome, he will then feel shamed and embarrassed. Unnecessarily so, I should say, but that's the feeling that you get from this.
Going to jump forward now a couple of weeks later. Presumably there's more of this in the gap, this back and forth. But let's hear how the conversation turns nearly 2 weeks later.
Hey, babes. I won't lie, but I'm a bit anxious. Kiss, kiss.
Hi, babes. What about? Kiss, kiss, kiss. You got me all nervous now and worried. Worried emoji, kiss, kiss. But hit me with it straight. Kiss, kiss. No curveballs, please. Kiss, kiss.
No, I'm not curving you, babes. Kiss, kiss, kiss. It's about the 240 I asked you about, babes. I got a loan off the lassie at the base store, and I promised her over the next weekend. It's not just me to owe. I'm just anxious about it. Kiss, kiss, kiss. I know you told me next Friday, but it's not me to owe. Kiss, kiss, kiss.
I thought you were going to give me the shoulder then, if I'm being honest. Kiss, kiss.
So here, I mean, they've presumably been in regular contact. There was some data missing from what you sent, but it's clear that from the page numbers that there's a gap in between. And there's obviously been quite a lot going on between the two of them over that 2 weeks. She starts off in this interaction by saying that she's anxious. And how does that unfold? What was happening there? Why is she saying that?
This is an interesting one. So in the 2 weeks, there's been some normal conversation from Roger's part, but from Camilla's part, she's been a little bit distant. She's not kept up with the usual expected, hearts and emojis and, quite instant responses and, asking about him, saying about what's going on with her. She's been withholding it slightly without saying there's anything wrong. So there's this anxiety that's been building up in Roger, a bit like a perpetrator of coercive control might try and manipulate emotions in that way. She then comes out with, hey, babes, I won't lie, but I'm a bit anxious. This is the first point at which in these 2 weeks that she's come out and said that there's something wrong. He's been trying to get from her that there's something wrong, but now she's saying. Now, if we move straight to the end of this extract, Roger says, I thought you were going to give me the shoulder, if I'm being honest. He thought this 2 weeks of being a little bit distant was her ending the relationship, cooling off, maybe she's found someone else. So he's actually relieved that there's a problem that he could perhaps help with, and he's not being, he's not being broken up.
That's his biggest fear, really, isn't it? At
Yeah.
this point.
And what she's figured out during the course of the interactions is that when she cools off that's when it really manipulates him. That's when he really wants to know what's going on. That's when his ears are pricked up, and that's what really gets his anxiety going. So she knows that she can use that as a tool, and she does do so frequently throughout this relationship. So, hi babes, what are you nervous about? Then nothing. Minutes of nothing. You've got me all nervous and worried. Hit me straight, no curveballs. The reason he's saying no curveballs is because she keeps prevaricating in previous interactions. She's saying what's wrong. And like we were saying before, she doesn't in the next turn come back and say what it is. Just hit me straight. Now, she is saying about money, and she's saying indirectly that she needs money from him. Interestingly, though, it's not for her. It's to pay back someone else. So this changes the perception of risk, and it also doesn't have her as someone who wants the money from him. It's actually her being a good friend. This is how this is framed. So you can see that this is very different from give me money now. Yeah, again. So she tries different techniques every time she's asking for money.
In this next extract, you can really see how effectively the fraudster has groomed the victim. We keep using this term grooming, and I think it's really, really clear from this next interaction how effectively Camilla has managed to achieve that with Roger. So we're going to listen to this one.
How are your feet today? All that blinking, walking. Is run your feet for you too? Kiss, kiss, kiss. You ticklish? Rose emoji, heart emoji. On a different note, you got enough money for food and supplies? Kiss, kiss, kiss. Lips emoji, kiss emoji, lips emoji.
I'm running out, babes. Kiss. Maybe a day or two to go in the week. I just feel shy about bothering you about it, babes. Sad emoji, sad emoji.
So there we hear the victim introducing the subject of money. It's Roger, not Camilla. And is that unusual? Because there's no prompting specifically there by Camilla, by the fraudster in this case.
This is not unusual at all. And this is showing how effective the grooming is on the part of the perpetrator, of Camilla. She's got him in a situation where he wants to look after her, and he's checking in on her. She's posed herself as someone who's quite vulnerable, but really reticent to reveal that vulnerability. She even says here, I feel shy about bothering you about it. She doesn't want to say when she needs money. This is really powerful because it shows that the way she's showing herself as someone who wants to look as though she's powerful. She's in the army, she wants to look strong, as well as wanting money from him, but being shy to ask for it. This is the perception she's putting across. And this is perfect, really, for particularly a male victim of romance fraud, because you get that kind of white knight syndrome. You want to step in and help. The fact that she says she's shy about it makes her seem all the more genuine, that she's not just demanding money. So he feels that she won't say every time that she needs money, so he needs to keep checking in. And the fact that she seems so shy makes her look the opposite of someone who's trying to defraud him.
She's ashamed to ask him for money.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the relationship.
Yeah.
So we heard the victim introducing the subject of money. It was Roger making that offer, and there was no particular prompting from the fraudster. Now, we've already introduced this idea that Roger has been groomed by Camilla. Is that an aspect of that? Can you go into this idea of grooming a bit more?
This is really classic grooming. And grooming in this sense is the manipulation over time by the fraudster, getting them into a situation where they expect a certain response at a certain time. So they would expect the person that they love to respond in a certain way to certain things. What Roger has been groomed into expecting is for Camilla to be really shy about asking for money. She might send certain clues that she's feeling particularly vulnerable, which he then has to decode.
He's reading this as that she's ashamed to ask him for money, and so he's going to come in, and that's how he's been trained to be in this interaction.
Absolutely, which is perfect for a perpetrator of romance fraud because it means they don't have to do the ask for money that's shown as a red flag for this crime.
Yes, no bank says don't volunteer to give money to someone you love.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he has to figure out that she's vulnerable. He has to then read the signs and then think, oh, she's not telling me something here.
He's being a lovely boyfriend. He's anticipating her needs.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as well as this sort of grooming aspect, I guess another feeling is that fraud is quite a passive crime and also relatively non-violent. But I think what we'll hear in the next clip is a ramping up of the nastiness when the mood of the conversation or the interaction starts to change.
Yeah.
So let's listen to that clip.
Who is M. Wilcox that's been giving you the money recently?
What's this today?
It's just a question, babes. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Heart emoji, lips emoji, heart emoji.
Again, this should be the last time you're making me explain where my money comes from. If it's a problem, let me know. I'd figure out another way to sort myself. If you forgot my last explanations, you should take your mind back. Besides, why are you asking?
Okay, I'll put it another way. Do you have conversations with anyone other than me? Heart emoji, lips emoji, heart emoji.
I can't believe you're asking me this.
So Camilla getting quite menacing there, almost sort of threatening aura about some of those contributions. It seems like things might not be quite going her way and she doesn't like it. Is that kind of what's going on? I imagine this would be quite frightening for Roger.
Yes, this is part of the grooming that we've just spoken about. He is being trained to know that if he questions her or anything about the money, there's going to be quite a severe response that comes his way. So he's being groomed, trained into not asking about the money. She doesn't like this at all. So the M. Wilcox, this I imagine is someone else that she's been
defrauding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he has oversight of some of the money that's coming and going because he's being groomed as well. He's been used to transfer money as well. Her response, what's this today? This is, another thing. What are you going on about today?
Oh, as in there's always something.
There's
and so
always
what's
something.
this latest problem?
Absolutely, yeah. What's your problem now? And we can see this, how it goes through when she goes, again, this should be the last time. So she's saying again because, right, I'm going through this again.
Yeah.
You're questioning me about sick of this. It's the last time you're making me explain where my money comes from. Interestingly, actually, her money is actually the money of other people that she's defrauding, including him. She said, if it's a problem, let me know. I'll figure out another way of sorting myself out. Now, he, as far as he knows, is the sole way that she's keeping herself afloat, that she is managing to feed herself and clothe her child. And she's out in Afghanistan and she's in some kinds of desperate situations, physically demanding, dangerous situations. This is actually a threat of withdrawing, allowing him to help her.
So a kind of veiled threat of working out another way to sort of, as in another person.
Another
someone
person
not
who
you.
can help, or to allow herself to be in a situation where she doesn't have enough to eat and then she goes out on manoeuvres in Afghanistan. So she is going to be physically in peril. This is classic coercive control where the victim feels responsible for the physical and or mental well-being of that perpetrator. She is threatening to withdraw herself from the relationship, from this situation where she's allowing herself to be helped. Why are you asking? Put another way, do you have conversations with anyone other than me? Now, this is interesting. Conversation analytically, Camilla has gotten this wrong. He's asking, who's this M. Wilcox? Not thinking, are you defrauding someone?
No.
Thinking, do you have another boyfriend? Now, she doesn't realise this. Her mind goes to, why are you questioning me where I get my money from? You think I'm a criminal, because that's what she is. He believes he's in a relationship, which is where his mind goes to.
Yes.
So we can see these different purposes playing out here. But then she gets back on the programme. Her last turn here, I can't believe you're asking me this, with the 3 exclamation marks. This is, the wronged lover here. I can't believe you're questioning me in the relationship. So she's back on track here. But you can see how perpetrators quite quickly turn nasty when they're being questioned.
Yeah. So continuing in this kind of nasty vein, I've got a few more of Camilla's contributions that kind of come over the next few days. This kind of menacing aura is carrying on through these.
You know what? Just leave me alone. You're looking at rubbish and looking for rubbish. If you want to leave, just say. The next time, I'm going to react. Trust me, don't say anything changed. If I'm not deserving of your trust, you should find someone who does. It's enough rubbish. I won't let you reduce my standard to a self-explaining wench just because you feel jealous. As far as I'm concerned, my conscience is clear. That's all.
So this is quite a different feel for the conversation from those early stages, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's Camilla doing here then?
This is another escalation. So Roger does not leave it alone from the previous interaction. He wants to know more. He's seen more bank statements and he's seen more references of different names. And he's also sending money on behalf of her to different people, different men's names. And he's saying, why is this man's name in the reference, in the bank reference? And she says, nothing, leave it alone. Why are you so interested in this? She's trying to stop him from being curious about this. She just wants him to send the money and continue with the relationship. His continuous questioning will only go one way, which is that he finds out that she is in fact a criminal. So she wants to play almost like the jilted lover to try and distract him from what's really going on.
To try and put a stop to this line of inquiry that he's pursuing.
And the explicit mention of jealousy there, which is a relationship thing, not a football thing. Yeah.
You're looking at rubbish and looking for rubbish. The rubbish here is you're looking for some bad thing that's going on in the background, either a boyfriend or perhaps fraud.
So alongside this kind of language, there's also, and we see this in other forms of domestic abuse and coercive control, we see that the abuser trying to sever other relationships with the victims, friends and family, or even the authorities and so on. So we get this in this next clip here in this context of romance fraud.
So is it okay to ask that you keep our issues out of the conversation with your friend on your next meeting? What do you intend to tell them then? Because as you're aware, you couldn't tell them money came in on behalf of your wife. But it's crazy, babe, isn't it? Bloody wankers. I think you need to ask the bank what's up with them. They should be happy about money coming in. Heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji. If this ain't good enough for them, babe, just ask them if you need to call your lawyer. Don't say any more than that. Heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji. And don't let them try to talk you into discussing your personal life. You know that's when you need to stop answering questions and ask for a representative. Heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji.
We've got several extracts from Camilla where she's requesting that Roger keeps this to himself. Either don't tell your friend, or this is what you should say to the bank, or don't give that away, or whatever it might be. She's actually criticising the bank for safeguarding him. They've kind of raised an alarm. What's the game plan here? What's Camilla trying to achieve with that?
And this is where you get the disjoint between a real romantic relationship and a fraudulent one. Now, a real one, people are happy to share the information and spread it far and wide that they're in love. Fraudsters cannot have that happen because people outside of the relationship have not been groomed. They've not been manipulated into a situation that feels normal, but actually it's completely abnormal.
They would spot it.
They would spot it, which is partly where this shame and blame comes from societally. It's like, how could you not see it? I can see it clearly. But when you're groomed into it, it's a bit like that fable of the frog in the cold water, and you turn up the heat slightly and the frog doesn't jump out because it's only slightly warmer, and then eventually the frog is in boiling water.
Right.
We only see the boiling water bit rather than,
not all the build-up, but all the rapport and so on,
So she wants to stop Roger from talking to his friends about her. He's really excited because he's in love. And besides, aside from the minor disagreements and the money bit, things are really good. And actually, there's days and months and, a long time of conversations that are really lovely and really normal feeling, And he gets a lot out of it, which again is where the shame comes from afterwards, because he's enjoyed this relationship. So is it okay to ask you keep our issues out the conversation with your friend on your next meeting? Really, what she's doing in here is engaging in the bread and butter of being a fraudster, which is trying to isolate the victim from friends, family. And then you mentioned the bank there, other sources of support that will see and notice and stop it from happening. She keeps it very boundaried, very narrow. Keep our issues out of the conversation on your next meeting. This is really close scripting.
It's a very directive instruction, which we've not really seen prior to this point.
No, it's all been trying to invite a response, or invite the victim to offer things. But here it's keep it out of the conversation on your next meeting. Now, our issues, though, is deliberately broad. So the issues could be anything, but what she means is talk about money. However, if she says, don't talk about having given me money to your friend, That is a red flag in itself. So she's keeping it really broad. Are issues. Notice that there are issues as well. This is a classic technique. This is us. This is not me wanting your money. This is us having issues.
Yeah. Us versus everybody else who doesn't understand.
Everyone else.
Yeah.
And then the bank. I mean, she's swearing at the bank. I've heard banksmen called all sorts of things in these interactions. Useless, trying to keep us from being together, being interfering, stopping you doing what you want with your money. These are all themes that always come out. And, if this isn't good enough for them, just ask them if you need to call your lawyer. So she's posing the situation that Roger is in is he's in the right and she's in the right and everyone else is in the wrong, and they can lawyer up and work against the world, and they can work together a bit like Romeo and Juliet. It's just them against the world.
We've started to hear about how Roger's bank has obviously raised the alarm, so we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper with this next clip. This is the final clip we're going to hear. We're going to see here the effect that this has. So the bank's raised the alarm and we're going to see what kind of effect that has on the fraudster.
Hi, babes. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Heart emoji, lips emoji, heart emoji. Peeps who have been putting money into my bank account have reported my bank account for a military love scam. I've been asked to justify the money and give evidence for things I've sold related to these amounts. Heart emoji.
WTF? Who said this? The fraud department? Heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji.
Yes, my bank account has been reported for the above. Kiss, kiss.
What peep in particular? Have they mentioned a name yet or what? Heart emoji, heart emoji, heart emoji.
He asked me if I'd heard of catfishing. Obviously looked it up when I came to work. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Heart emoji, lips emoji, heart emoji.
Okay, and? Kiss, kiss, kiss. Heart emoji, heart emoji.
The computer just explains what catfishing was, but obviously answered no at the time because I didn't know. I do now, though. Kiss, 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 heart emoji. There's a lot online about it, and didn't have time being in work to read it all, but got the gist of it. Heart emoji. Don't want to read it in work, to be honest. Kiss.
So what are you saying then? First bank called about some fraud, now they're telling you about catfishing? What are you driving at?
So what we've got here is finally coming to the point. Roger doesn't quite accuse her of being a catfish, of being a fraudster, but he's come out and said, the bank have warned me about this and they've used these terms. And on sort of TV shows on fraud, including your own, on Scam Interceptors and other shows, the scammer usually draws a line, scarpers, hangs up, breaks the relationship at the point where someone's calling them out. What happens in this case? What do romance fraudsters do? Is it different than that?
It is different. They will keep on the line. They will try and wiggle out of everything. They will try and turn everything back on that victim. Why don't you trust me? Why are you trusting someone else? And they will withdraw their affection and all sorts of things. And the reason why romance fraud is different is because the victim is invested. They invested in terms of love rather than money. They've often given a large amount of money. As we know, the average is around £11,000 per victim. But here, the victim is genuinely in love with the criminal. This is what happens. They don't want it to be a fraud, and they are much more open to hearing any excuse why it's not a fraud. They would much rather that happen than not, because the alternative, and I'm not saying they're doing this deliberately, but psychologically it's much more protective, because not only will they have then lost money, they will have lost the person they loved, so they've got that grief there. But the person they thought they loved has manufactured, has engineered this entire situation purely to steal money from them, so none of it was real. So it's so psychologically harmful, the brain is trying to protect itself. So the perpetrators know this, so they'll keep going, and they'll actually use what the victim is saying against them.
We've listened to loads of examples over the course of this episode, and you've talked about various tactics, the isolation, the love bombing, all the sort of grooming processes that go into this. And I just wondered if there's anything that we haven't covered in any of the extracts we've looked at today that are the tried and tested methods that you've spotted fraudsters using to reel in their prey.
There's lots, but something I'd like to really highlight is the issue of sunk cost fallacy. throwing good money after bad quite
Okay.
often. And it also applies to gambling. That's the only similarity, by the way, with this, with romance fraud and gambling, is that once you've started giving money, you are more predisposed to continue rather than think, oh, do you know what, I'll just leave it, I've lost that money.
Throwing good money after bad.
Throwing good money after bad, yeah. So if there's one chance that this situation could be real, and all they need to do to prove that is to pay that final amount, they will do that. And these criminals will play on this. They'll say one final payment, one final hurdle, and then we can be together. Now, anyone who has invested money, time, love, emotion is not going to stop at that point. One final one. Quite often they've got friends and family in the background saying, this is a scam, stop it. I think, well, no, this is real. I will prove them right. I will manage to get that person to live with me. Something that criminals also do, once romance fraud is finished, they realise everything's gone and they stop that interaction. Victims are then ripe for something called recovery fraud. Recovery fraud, which is when you'll then get someone purporting to be from the police, trading standards, other organisations, and they'll say, I heard you've been a victim of this awful crime. I'm going to help you get your money back. Now there's a chance for redemption. There's a chance to pay back all the people you've borrowed money from. There's a chance to actually not feel so stupid. Not that you should, but people do. And that in itself is a fraud. So you end up giving money to someone saying they're an organisation. They just need the money to start the investigation.
And it just happens all over
Happens again. And it's that desperation to want to try and make it better that all of these frauds are predicated on.
The other part of this case that we've mentioned, it's come up in the chats a couple of times you've mentioned, is he's also laundering money
Yes.
for Camilla. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
This is not very common, but this can happen in romance frauds. This is where the victim themselves takes money into their bank account from other victims. So this makes the risk for the perpetrator much lower. The victim themselves is taking the risk because they're taking that money in. So in this case, the people that were being defrauded reported this as a fraud. And they said, my money has been sent into Roger's bank account. And that's when the whole thing fell apart. Thank goodness that they reported it, which meant that Roger could then realise that he was in that situation. But quite often, not only will the fraudsters take money from victims, but they'll use them to launder the money. Now, when things go wrong for the fraudster and for the relationship, the supposed relationship, sometimes the criminals can leverage that situation and say, well, yeah, you know what, this is a total fraud, but tell you what, you are a criminal and you've been complicit, so now you've got to do what I say. And then they start to extort money from them. They blackmail them.
The person posing as Camilla was never traced or prosecuted. What resolution do we have? Is Roger okay? What's the kind of outcome there?
He is okay. Felt shame for a very long time. But what he has come to realise through taking part in a TV show called For Love or Money, actually the first series, he's realised that this is a very sophisticated manipulation and it's not personal. He was not targeted specifically. He did not become a victim because of anything that he did wrong. It's the perpetrator that's done something wrong here. And the linguistic techniques that we've exposed today show that it is very delicate and this is very incremental and this is not the victim's fault at all. So he is doing fine.
Great. That's good to hear.
Someone has to put the other view, right? And I know I'm going to sound like the prick here. But there's some part of this where perhaps people will think, hang on a minute, these are adults. You've got to take responsibility for yourself. Yeah, you were conned. Although all these devious methods were used, you do have some part to play in this. You told the bank that, no, this is real. I hear all your warnings, but I'm going to go on sending the money. You must have heard questions like that before. What can you say to people who have that point of view?
Now, this is where my research into the links between the language of perpetrators of fraud and perpetrators of domestic abuse and coercive control comes into hand. Right, okay, we need to use this to try and explain why individuals act in ways that we wouldn't if we think we're in that situation. And it is that grooming, it is that manipulation. And those questions about, well, you decided, you sent that money, you are complicit, you're responsible. We would never ask those questions of victims of coercive control and domestic abuse. We understand that they are not at fault for the situation that they are in. In fact, most crimes, the victims are not blamed. There are comparators with rape, for example, and rape myths of yesteryear. Many still stick around, these rape myths. And I think that there's a lot to be said about trying to attend to these myths around fraud. It's your fault, you press the button. Because this is what the fraudsters aim to do. They aim to have the blame on that victim. And yes, we all do have a personal responsibility, and we have a personal responsibility to keep ourselves safe and to look after our finances. But also we're human beings, and by understanding more about what happens behind the scenes and the linguistic crime scene that a fraud actually is, we can start to understand why people act in certain ways in these situations, and they're making what they believe to be good and reasonable, rational choices and decisions in a completely distorted reality. So we cannot lay the blame at the feet of the victims in these cases.
So do you think that those like, I don't know, the Tinder swindler on Netflix, or there's a whole genre almost showing some of these frauds, are they doing more good than harm, or what do you feel about them?
Oh, it's so difficult because on one hand it brings these crimes to the public consciousness. We understand more about them and people are interested in them. It's no longer hidden. On the other hand, when we have these kind of shows as infotainment, it's very difficult because then you have the blowback from the public. So the victims of the Tinder swindler, Cecilia is a good friend of mine, actually, one of the victims, and she's told me the impact that the public response had on her. She's called a gold digger and stupid and all of these things. And in fact, the criminal got away pretty much scot-free. He's got his own podcast now, and he's got merchandise and all of this. And you think, actually, does this cause these criminals to become a bit of a celebrity? So I'm on the fence, really. I do a lot of TV and radio work and things like that. And mostly it's because I want to have that viewpoint shown. So it's not just entertainment. The reality of what happens behind these frauds needs to be put out there. The fact that it's so media friendly at the moment, and Netflix and all these shows, is overall a good thing because we want the public talking about it. Crucially, we want them talking about it in the right way, though. We don't want those negative narratives coming in and blaming those victims.
That kind of brings me on to my next question, actually. So what really needs to change in terms of how this crime is perceived as compared to how it should be perceived? I know, for example, you don't like to use the word scam, so perhaps that might be a good place to start. What are the connotations of scam, which is a term that's often used to refer to this kind of fraud? What do we need to change about the way it's talked about?
Well, scam is related to Tinder swindler, scam, swindler, Yeah. It's one of those words that's reminiscent of, Del Boy crimes. For the younger members of the audience, you don't know what I'm talking about. But the kinds of crimes where it's not actually that serious and it's just a chance to try their hand to try and get some money from you, often small amounts of money, and actually they're a lovable rogue, those kind of things. Now, the use of scam is absolutely everywhere. The public knows what it means, but it's not a legal term. And as a criminologist and forensic linguist, it's really important, I think, that the terms are accurate. When
Language is important.
Language is important. Get it on a T-shirt. And if we continue to talk about these crimes as scams, it reduces the severity of it. It minimises it. It minimises the importance, minimises the effect of it. It doesn't minimise the prevalence because we all know, everyone knows that, fraud is everywhere. But we need to call it fraud because that's the crime in itself. The images that are conjured up with fraud are things, high value, really serious crimes, court prosecutions. With scams, it's something like a market stall, something like that, not as harmful. Something that I have done quite recently is work with Interpol about the use of the term pig butchering. Have you heard of pig butchering? It is awful. So pig butchering is the term that criminals use for romance frauds where they also have investment fraud in them. And this is the preferred favourite term of the media, the police, sometimes, not anymore. Now, I've had my hands on it, have used it.
So they're using the perpetrator's language.
Yes. Right. And saying, well, it's really media friendly and it's clickbait, so we're going to use it. And I've come along and said, absolutely cannot call it pig butchering. So the whole idea behind it is that the victim is the pig, right? So this is the epitome of dehumanising someone, calling them a pig, and actually getting in on this, like mainstream media. You have the pig, you fatten them up with the romance, you then slaughter them for their money when it's the time for the investment, and then they're dead, they're off. You go and get another pig.
Horrid.
Yeah. So Interpol and I thought, no, absolutely not. And we put out a statement, and Interpol very rarely put out statements like this, and they don't like to make big announcements like this. But they said, language is important. We shall no longer be endorsing or saying that anyone should use this term. Instead, we came up with another term. There's an official media-friendly term, which is romance baiting. Still a bit sexy. People kind of know what it's about because it's a romance, and they're using that as bait for another type of fraud. Internally, and the Home Office like this term as well, they use it. It's romance investment fraud hybrid, which I like most because it is exactly what it is, not as media friendly. So we've come to that conclusion. Interestingly, though, some advocates in the fraud sphere don't like the change. They want to keep using pig butchery.
It's partial success, isn't it?
Yes.
For yourself and linguistics to say
Absolutely.
the language is important here.
Yes.
And trying to move the language forward to help the framing of the crime.
Yes.
I think that's a very real contribution.
Yes, and the fact that language is the very way in which these criminals defraud their victims, we should also use language really carefully in the protection of victims, and it just hasn't been a priority. It hasn't been noticed that this is an incredibly important way, that the way we communicate with the public, it's essential. You know, they are being manipulated with language. We need to protect them with language.
I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit maybe about what's it like working on a case. So could you just sort of maybe talk a little bit about specifically how your work, your analyses helps to protect people?
Yeah, this is the most satisfying part of my job, bar none. Yeah. It's having contact with a victim, them trusting me with the interaction they've had with a criminal, which quite often, as I said earlier, they will feel ashamed about, and allowing me to analyse it. I will then use that analysis to look at the ways in which these criminals have used language to manipulate them. And there are so many patterns, so many similarities between every single case. There are often little bits and pieces that are different, but they're all along the same kind of theme. So, you know, mirroring, maybe one day they're divorced, the other day they're really religious. They'll use the same mechanisms. It's all about silencing, it's all about secrecy, urgency, isolating someone from sources of support. How do they do that? And then what I do with that information is that I use it as public-facing supportive guidance. So from these are the ways to protect yourself to this is how to restore your psychological health afterwards. This is how to be supported. And I don't give that directly to the public. I use the police, or the police use this information to create policy and strategy in order to communicate with the public more effectively. And I've started to chip away at these negative narratives that are put out unintentionally by these organisations. You know, phrases such as "don't be a fool," right? "Don't be a victim." You know, you see these things and you think, no, it must be different. And in that way, you start chipping away at it. More specifically, I've worked with Thames Valley Police to create a romance fraud booklet, which is now a national police resource. So it's been taken nationally, and police officers use it in their door-to-doors for victims of romance fraud, where just speaking to the victim hasn't been enough to get them out of the situation. So they're still in that situation where they feel that it's a real relationship. I've been told it's, you know, the light bulb moment. They look at it and you think, oh my gosh, that is me. Much more gentle way psychologically when you realise you've been a victim, that when it comes from you rather than someone knocking you as, oh, you're a victim of crime.
Yeah.
So there's practical things that my work has done, and it feels very satisfying to come full circle from a victim's come to me to say, what has happened here? Can you help other people from not becoming a victim of this crime, to actually that happening in real terms?
Yeah, so it's real, genuine social impact, actually changing people's lives.
Do you also get involved in casework, as I would think of casework, sort of prospective stuff, going to court, writing expert reports? Has that been part of what you've done as well?
Yes, and with Nicci's help, actually, I got my expert witness qualification a year or so ago. So thank you very much for that. Yes, I have. I've worked on a couple of cases, not many so far, but I've had really good success in the reports that I've written have actually changed CPS decisions from not a crime to, yes, this is a fraud. It feels great because it means that the direction of travel is moving from, well, you agreed to send the money to, Yes, there is manipulation and coercion.
Actually groomed your victim. Yeah.
Yes, and I've been in courts. I've been to the Old Bailey, actually, which was very nice indeed. I loved it in there. I had to be very still and very quiet. It was very difficult, obviously. But I heard the sentencing of someone called David Checkley, and he got sentenced for 11 years, which is a long time for a romance fraudster. And the judge spent about 45 minutes talking about the psychological impact of the crime and how that increased the severity of the offence and therefore increased the sentencing.
It's great to see that, but seeing acknowledged is the important.
This really is improving the delivery of justice
Absolutely,
through the analysis of language.
Yes,
It is
at the sharp end.
at the sharp end. So thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today. That's been a really fascinating discussion and a sort of walkthrough of this case of romance fraud. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Righting Wrongs. If you've got a question, remember you can get in touch with the show via email, writingwrongs, WRITING WRONGS @aston.ac.uk.
If you've been affected by any of the themes in this week's episode, please consider contacting the resources in the episode description.
This has been Righting Wrongs, an original podcast series from the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.